talking about Serbian Americans and how they view the LGBTQ plus community. However, before I begin, I would like to provide some context. Serbians are not merely just Serbians. They are Christian Orthodox Serbians, and they use that religious belief as a main identifier for themselves, illustrating how closely tied their ethnicity is to their religion. This is very commonplace in the Balkans and can be seen with Croatian Catholics, Bosnian Muslims, and Bosnian Muslims. Naturally, the Serbian Orthodox Church is a very powerful presence in Serbian society, and not just in politics, but in everyday life. So when the church made an official statement condemning homosexuality, it led Serbians to have a very negative disposition towards the LGBTQ plus community, which I'll go into further detail with later. However, to fully understand why religion today plays such a large role in Serbian life, we have to go back to the foundation of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was formed in 1918 and consisted of Serbia, Croatia, Macedonia, Montenegro, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Slovenia. As Marie Jane Kalic describes, for many, Yugoslavia became the code word for a better life in dignity, peace, freedom, and prosperity. It was after World War II and under the presidency of Josip Broz Tito that the country began to form into a socialist state in which Tito's prime purpose was to unify the people under the meanings of brotherhood. Ultimately, however, Yugoslavia fell apart soon after Tito's death on May 4th, 1980. As once Tito became the lifelong president of Yugoslavia in 1963, he quickly became the people's idol, and since religious activities were banned, many chose to worship him. Tito was a godlike figure to the people of Yugoslavia, as he was an extremely charismatic and eloquent man. So after his death, the nation was shocked with grief and mourning. This caused churches and mosques to gain a lot of power in a very quick time span, as all the citizens of Yugoslavia were turning towards their religions for guidance and hope. However, with Tito gone, it was already only a matter of time before Yugoslavia crumbled along with him. During this time, ethnic tensions quickly began to rise, with religion gaining more power, and soon it just became another characteristic that further divided the people, as a person was no longer Serbian or Croatian. They were Orthodox Serbians and Catholic Croatians. Religion quickly became entangled with ethnicity and became the ultimate catalyst for the Yugoslavian war. Today, the Serbian Orthodox Church is one of the most trusted institutions in the state, and is seen as a way to bring back traditional ideals and values. As after the fallout of Yugoslavia, an agenda was placed to bring back these traditional values of being religious, taking care of family, and having children as a way to process and heal from the war. And because of this, they hold a large amount of political power and sway over the people, in particular the LGBTQ plus community. As the Serbian Orthodox Church interprets homosexuality as a sin, illness, and disorder, as something unnatural, sacrilegious, and destructive. Many bishops and other members of the church see homosexuality as something disgraceful and have gone so far as to stop parliamentary proceedings regarding laws and acts about the homosexual community, or have called governmental officials asking them to not pass a certain bill, such as an anti-discrimination bill. This has caused many Serbians to associate homosexuality with Western depravity as LGBTQ plus activists that are both immoral degenerates and national traitors. This is known as homonationalism, which is when LGBTQ plus policies are integrated within a nationalistic agenda, which often perpetuates that homosexuals cannot exist in the state and are a disease coming from an enemy country. Serbian ethno-nationalists attack the homosexual community as a way to protect their traditional values and the nation. It's been stated that many Serbian people view homosexuality as a form of social terrorism and a disease that's been sent from the West to infiltrate and bring down the nation. As such, many demonstrations of gay rights have ended up violent, as ethno-nationalists view these protests as a form of Western propaganda, especially pride parades. When the first ever Pride Parade was held in Belgrade in 2001, it saw many of its participants being in a large-scale attack. And it wasn't until 2010 another Pride Parade was put in place, which is the image I have shown here. But there was an anti-gay riot in which over 75 people got injured. Many of the people who attacked the participants of the Pride Parade got away with assault and weren't punished, which only furthers the conflict. The first successful non-violent Pride Parade took place in 2014, as there was a large wall of policemen that sectioned off parts of the city to ensure the participants in Pride were safe, and ever since then, there's been a Pride nearly every year. However, there were always anti-gay protests that followed the Pride Parade route, so while it may be more physically safe for them to be there, it is no less harmful. The policing of Pride itself also downplays the political aspect of Pride and causes it to still be viewed as something to be hidden from the public. All this research ultimately led me to my gap, as there have been plenty of research done about the Serbian Orthodox community and their views of the LGBTQ plus community. However, there's been no studies done how the Serbian American community views the LGBTQ plus community, as it would be interesting to see how a Serbian's political ideology has changed and shifted since their immigration to America and introduction to American politics. More specifically, Serbians view the homosexual community as something negative, whereas America is more tolerant and does not have a solid central religion that influences governmental policies. I decided to conduct a survey that used the Force-Likert scale, in which no neutral option was available for the first 10 questions, with the last 4 being free response, as a way to collect both quantitative and qualitative data. I also translated the survey into Serbian to ensure that the Serbian Americans who didn't understand English very well could take a survey that they would be able to comprehend. There's also a small sample size, as there are only a finite amount of Serbian Americans that live in the North Kansas City area. The first set of questions for my survey revolved around the participants' faith and viewpoints of the Serbian Orthodox Church. In the graph shown, the participants are devout followers and follow its teachings and its statements that the church has made, which is interesting when looking at these 2 graphs, as it shows an overall support for the LGBTQ+ community, even though the Serbian Orthodox Church openly condemns homosexuality. This positive trend continues throughout the rest of my research, as shown by these 2 graphs, which are about LGBTQ+ rights in America and Serbia. These positive trends are interesting, as not only does the average Serbian not support the LGBTQ+ community, but the church also condemns it, often viewing it as a sickness. This is further expanded upon in the free response section. Through coding and finding trends in the participants' responses for these questions, I found that for the first question, most Serbian Americans viewed them in a positive or neutral light, which follows with the positive trends said previously, with some examples of this being, it's their choice, I am behind them, and I see everyone is equal and deserves respect. For the second question, nearly all of the participants didn't or only once talked about the LGBTQ+ community, but most didn't elaborate on their reasoning. However, despite the majority of responses being positive, there were a few responses that were negative, such as this participant who wrote, "Yes, my opinion is that homosexuality is a handicap from birth, and I do not condemn that person. But now in this modern world and life when individuals want to be in trend, I do not support it." This shows that while this person isn't necessarily against the LGBTQ+ community, they still view it akin to an illness and something that holds a person back. It's also important to note that they believe it's become a popular trend. This belief is most likely due to the amount of people who are part of the community today. The third question was unanimous no, and this is most likely due to the Yugoslavian war that the participants had to live through. And since the war was caused by religious conflicts, the participants most likely felt that religion of any kind should not hold political power. The final question saw a lot of the participants explaining how God created man and woman to love and marry each other, but that they had no qualms of those who chose to be of the same sex. My research has shown positive trends in favor of the LGBTQ+ community, which is interesting as many Serbians are against the LGBTQ+ community, indicating that despite the Orthodox Church's negative disposition and condemnation of homosexuality, Serbian Americans are more open and supportive of the LGBTQ+ community. This could be due to a number of reasons. However, I believe one of the reasons is due to America's political climate, being more accepting and tolerant of the LGBTQ+ community than that of Serbia. Another reason for these positive trends is the fact that the Serbian Orthodox Church holds less influence and power than it does in Serbia, as a number of these churches are rather small and restricted to their local communities. However, despite my best efforts, there were several limitations regarding my research, such as the research pool for potential candidates were quite small, as there are only a finite number of Serbian Americans who live in the North Kansas City area, causing the research to become more akin to a case study. So the Serbian Americans that were surveyed cannot speak for the whole Serbian American community. Another limitation is a potential language discrepancy. Even though I sent out an English and Serbian version of the survey, there is still a chance of a translation error or for the candidate to not understand what the question was asking of them. Lastly, there was most likely a large number of self-report biases, considering the large amount of support for the LGBTQ+ community, which is quite different from Serbian stances on homosexuality. It can be easily inferred that most Serbian Americans were simply stating what they believe they should write, not what they themselves believe. So it was hard to say which ones were genuine and those who were made so they could not out themselves as homophobic. For potential research in the future, it would be beneficial to ask specific questions about the person taking the survey, such as age, gender, and the year they immigrated, or what relation they have to the Serbian American community. Another important factor could be asking if the surveyor themselves are in the LGBTQ+ community or know someone who is. That would add a layer of nuance to the research. The research would also be more conclusive if the testing range was increased from Kansas City, Missouri to the whole of the state or multiple states, as there would be more data to support the results made. Throughout my research, it's been shown that Serbian Americans are more open and supportive towards the LGBT+ community than that of Serbians. This goes to show that living in an environment that is more tolerant and accepting of people of various identities helps a person who was previously closed-minded also become more tolerant and accepting. However, the results of this survey are inconclusive, as simply not enough Serbian Americans took this survey, causing my findings to be skewed and not very well supported. the inconclusive data, this study has opened up the future of LGBTQ plus research in the Serbian American community, and I look forward to that research. Thank you all so much for listening to my presentation. I will now be taking questions.
How did your initial exploration of the scholarly conversation lead to your final research question or project goal?
I initially looked into Serbian politics and history, and it was there that I discovered the negative outlook the country had on the homosexual community. Which from there I saw it stem from, it's where I saw it stem from nationalistic and extreme religious ideas and beliefs, and that made me curious to see if Serbian Americans still held the same viewpoints of the homosexual community as Serbians, as the two live in completely different political atmospheres.
What are the real-world implications or consequences related to your findings?
It opens up the gateway for more research into the Serbian American community, as again, there's not a lot of research done into this specific area of study. And seeing how closely tied Serbians are to their religion and how that intersects, it would be interesting to see where that intersection still intersects and where it divulges, essentially, which is what my research has shown. And by having more research in this field, it will be able to better either support my findings or debunk them.
What was the most important research skill you developed as a result of this process, and how might you apply it to your future endeavors?
I was able to really work well on my writing and managed to write a technical paper that still had a voice, using the writing strategies that we went over in class and constant editing. And I'll be sure to use these strategies that I've used in